Well, welcome, Neil. Welcome, Neil, to Global Digital Week. And we're delighted to have you, Neil. And for the people watching, I just want to give them a little bit of information about you. You're a lifelong politician, heavily involved in education on an international field, Europe and Asia. You sit on many boards, you chair many boards, and you're really in the education space, aren't you? And I want to dig deeper into your educational experience and go through some of the areas that you've been involved in today. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself, Neil?
Well, thank you very much, Christina. I have been involved in education, as you say, for a long, long time. And I continue to be so because I think it's actually of fundamental importance to our economy, our society, and our role in sort of the global sphere. So it seems to me that we have got to get education right. And by that, I mean every education from start to finish, from the day you're born until you could be educated no longer. So that is my approach. And I've always believed that we should have high quality education which recognizes the changing economy as we see it, and also anticipates the role of technology.
Yes, Neil, and we're in change now. We're in a period of change where what we thought when we were younger has completely changed, and our consumers, the people that we're educating, have completely changed. Even different generations have different expectations on how they receive information and for example, duration of content, how it's delivered. Have you seen those changes as you've chaired boards throughout your career?
Absolutely, I have. When I started off, we were circulated with papers a few days beforehand, etc. And now, of course, it's all by electronic activity. And of course, COVID has meant that we're all Zooming and Microsoft Teamsing and so on. So it's completely changed the way in which we communicate. But the essence of communication hasn't changed, which is it is very important and must be done. My predecessor as Member of Parliament for Stroud once regretted that the time for cool, calm deliberation would end just because we've got a cable attached between London and Washington. And he was the Foreign Secretary at the time, Lord John Russell.
Well, I know that you're heavily involved. You're the Chief Executive of UK-China Culture and Education Cooperation. Now, that's a long title. I want you to tell us about what that is, what it involves, and then I'll ask you a follow-up question on that.
Well, thank you, Christina. UCEC, that's the shortened version, and the one I keep on using, is a British company charged with the task of finding what's best about education in Britain, chiefly in the early years sector, but not exclusively so, and making it possible for people in China to benefit from it. So that is about choosing the right kind of learning modules, education services, and so on, making them adaptable for China, and making sure that people can seize them. And that's actually the marketing aspect of it. So that's really what we do. We're also interested in creating children's centres, or family centres, if you like. They haven't started yet, chiefly because of COVID. But when they do, they'll further enhance our reach into China.
That's fabulous. Are you actually thinking of taking it into any other markets?
Well, China's pretty big. Every year, 15 million babies are born, and China has plenty of opportunity. But I have actually worked in countries like Myanmar, for example, with a different label. I was actually advising the then Parliament on how to act really as a sort of a democratic chamber with the usual characteristics of being charged with the task of holding the government accountable and so on. But I actually did a lot in education there as well. So yes, China is not the only place, but I will focus on that for the time being.
Yeah. Well, there'll be many people watching this who are also in the education space. There will also people watching, if you like, from different governments around the world, and they'll be trying to transfer knowledge from one place to the next. Do you have any guidance or warnings about transferring content or courses and knowledge?
I think the first thing I would say is you've got to remember that lifting up something which looks good in one country might not land particularly well in another unless you take into account cultural differences, differences of process, administration even, and certainly obviously language. So you have to localize, if you like, the material that you are taking abroad. And I think the best way to do that is have the right set of partners in the country to which you are promoting your products. So in the case of UCEC, we've got really good relationships with universities and education institutes in China. And I think that's absolutely critical to the success of our model.
I couldn't agree more, because this conference, it is about technology, but you've got to have brilliant partners, haven't you? Well thought through partners aligned in the mission that you're trying to move forward.
Yes, you do. You've got to choose your partners well, and develop a relationship with them, which is based on trust, transparency, and ease of exchange of ideas and so on. I do that. Obviously, between United Kingdom and China, we're challenged by distance, but and also the impact of COVID, because we can't get to China right now, or certainly not easily. So it's getting up early in the morning and doing the Zoom meetings then and so on. But it really is essential to build relationships. But I do that, of course, in the United Kingdom as well, because China is represented here, and many of our partners who are working with us in this project are based here. So it's also important to take into account their interests, needs, and values, if you like.
And it's fair to say that we were increasingly using technology to communicate the way we are now and with our partners. But when COVID hit, we were thrown into it. I think everybody will agree that we all had to start learning tools that we'd had no experience of in the past. That's been a challenge for everybody.
I think that's absolutely right. Let's not forget face-to-face meetings have their value. We first met at a face-to-face meeting,
Yes,
and I like them. I think that Zoom meetings can be often a little bit too transactional,
yes.
and I think that face-to-face meetings are better for developing ideas and strategy. But a combination of both is really important. I'm looking forward to getting back out to China because I want to see people face to face, because that's how you can read the body language, etc., as much as anything else. And I do think that all forms of communication need to be used.
Yeah, I think you're right. And what I'm hearing from businesses, it's going to be a bit of a hybrid model. And I think what's going to happen, we're going to start meeting face to face more, because I think most people prefer it. But we'll be able to add value to our meetings or take away actions and have quick catch up, just like we are now, rather than waiting for the next meeting. I think things will move faster and be more efficient with the use of technology now for collaboration.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, because of course it's easier to follow up through this sort of technology and so on. But I do think you've got to network as well, and you can't just sort of switch on your Zoom and start networking from home. You have to know the people really before you start Zooming. So the networking activity, the networking function is still important and still needs to be done.
Yeah, I totally agree. Now, Neil, I'd like to move on to your role as chair of the Pearson Commission for Education, Work, Life and the Changing Economy. I'm particularly interested in a changing economy because this is an international conference. So many countries are looking to change and adapt what they do for their economy. Do you have any advice or models or best practice or insights that you can share on what you guys were looking at that time?
Well, our commission, as you say, was looking at the changing economy and actually thinking about how skills can be cultivated, developed across the piece to meet the needs of the changing economy. But you do need to know what the economy is changing into so that you can plan the skills and requirements going forward. So what is happening? Well, obviously, we've talked already about communication, and that's a characteristic which is obviously changing. But there are other things as well, and that is the type of activity we're doing. Manufacturing still happens, but often in a different way. It's not sort of car manufacturing where cars are coming down the line and one after the other, but quite often bespoke models and so on. And so you're needing to think about supply chains, you're needing to think about the workforce that all participates in that. I remember going to a factory in East Germany, a Porsche car factory, where, of course, at one time, the Soviet Union were dominant and East Germany was in a communist situation, and things weren't very efficient at all. But this car factory looked really good, and I was impressed by the supply chain. And this really leads me to my first key point about the work of the Commission, because the supply chain not only included the obvious, like batteries and tyres and so on, but actually schools, colleges and universities. Porsche were thinking not just about the raw materials, but about the human resources and where they came from and how to cultivate them. So I think one of the big changes is exactly that. And you see that in the Republic of Korea, where there's a huge interest with big conglomerates in what the education system is producing so that they can benefit from a workforce which is primed and ready. So that is one of the big changes, the relationship basically between education providers and the professions, the employers. I think the next big change is the way in which customers are able to basically navigate everywhere for anything. And it seems to me that that is clearly going to actually encourage more of the bespoke specialist product services requirements. I think it's also going to mean that businesses just simply have to be even more sure-footed in understanding what the market looks like and reactive to those understandings. So those are the key changes. And I think the final point I would make is that the economies are changing between each other. By that I mean, obviously, the United States, the European Union have been dominant economic powers and will remain so. But they are being challenged by emerging powers from elsewhere. Obviously China, but India too, and other countries as well. And so this is not just a question of thinking, well, what am I doing internally to be competitive? We have to be competitive everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely, Neil. And I think it's also important in terms of resilience with climate change and with technology, that we need to monitor our supply chains because they are now increasingly international, global. And as we put our own agenda together to transform our businesses, our business models and what we do and who we work with, sometimes it's easy to forget that we need to monitor our supply chain, the people who provide us, and how resilient are they, and how are they advancing in technology. Have you guys had any conversations about that, or do you have any insight?
Yeah, I think there's several things to say about this important area of supply chains. One is actually reputation, protecting your reputation. Dyson have recently come into trouble because of sourcing some products from areas in Asia which are just simply not good enough in terms of management and treatment of people. So I think it's really critical that firms recognize this question of reputation. They don't want to be connected to an outfit which simply has practices which are unacceptable. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is that you've got to make sure that you've got good relationships with your suppliers, wherever they happen to be. Now, the United Kingdom has taken the extraordinary decision to make things harder for most of its supply chain because, of course, we've left the European Union and therefore created a lot of friction between ourselves and suppliers. This is having a devastating effect on many parts of our economy. So I think the second lesson is that wherever you happen to be, you've got to make every effort to have good relationships with your suppliers. So protecting your supply chain, and that means good relationships, obviously, with China, for example, if you're in the Indo-China area or whatever. And I think that is absolutely critical. And the third thing about supply chains, we've seen so easily how they can be disrupted by the incident in the Suez Canal, for example, where the boat basically blocked. And it makes us remember that supply chains, trade generally, is really intense and it's really significant. And if we don't act in a way that protects those chains, then we'll be at risk. And of course, risks come from all sorts of directions. We're confronting one potentially now, given the situation in the Ukraine.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to move on now to the point that you are the founder of the Festival of Manufacturing and Engineering, and so I'm wondering why you were the founder of it. What was your motivation for it, and was it received well? Did people take action, and where is money being spent?
Well, those are three really good questions. When I first became Member of Parliament for Stroud, I was absolutely astounded to hear the Association of Secondary Heads tell me that the days of manufacturing were pretty much over, and none of their pupils would be heading into manufacturing. Well, even when they said it, I thought they were wrong, because I knew that 25% of all jobs in the Stroud district were actually connected to manufacturing. And so I thought to myself, if the schools don't understand the importance of manufacturing, even though they can actually, in most cases, see a factory from their staff window, how are we going to really get young people to think about jobs in engineering and manufacturing? So that is why I started it off. And we were really successful, because what I found was that large numbers of companies across the area were really thinking the same thing as I was, that we need more people to come to our factories with the skills and so on. And so it was really easy for me to get Renishaw and other great companies to sign up and say, we'll support you. Even Airbus down in Bristol were fantastic supporters. And I got support from all over the place, including the Prince of Wales, who came to open one of the festivals. And I was really pleased about that, because I know that he was interested, still is interested in this sort of area. And so to have sort of the future king in Stroud giving his support of the project was really helpful. So that was why I did it, and that's how it unfolded.
Well, so can you tell me what kind of achievements or what kind of insights and knowledge transfer was taking place because of the festival? What do you think people were learning? Was it more a transfer of knowledge to educators so they have an understanding and appreciation of what was going on?
Well, that latter point's certainly true. I did notice that schools were certainly thinking more about engineering, mathematics, the STEM subjects in general. So that was good. But what I was most pleased about was actually the number of people who went into apprenticeship schemes with firms, local firms, to proceed down in there. I noticed that a lot of them were going to Filton to learn about aviation with Airbus. Renishaws were really good. They recruited large numbers of apprentices throughout every year, and so on. And I saw the traffic of pupils going in their direction. So I was really pleased with the progress and success there. And I was sorry when I lost my seat that it wasn't going to be as successful going forward. But I certainly feel that sort of thing is a good thing to do.
Yeah, things are often driven by the passion of an individual, aren't they? But you know, Neil, I think this is a common discussion globally about the language between business and educators and closing that gap and the awareness. And so I think there's a big piece in that place that we need to tackle, and other countries need to tackle. It's like a completely different language, isn't it? A different way to look at things.
You're completely right about that. And we really do need to, switch the lights on, so to speak, in both the world of manufacturing and engineering, but of course, actually the world of business. It's not just the making of things, but it's everything else as well. Because I think you learn such a lot by doing that. meeting people, learning about their experiences, and actually sometimes seeing the problems and helping to solve those problems is all good for the sector as a whole. So I'm a great believer in people working together. And I admire, for example, the German economy, which insists on having chambers which are both statutory and compulsory, so that all businesses are involved in the sort of relationship building with schools and colleges and so on. And I think that's one of the reasons why the German economy is so much more productive than our own, because the workforce is already imbued with the ideas that it needs to have to go forward. But of course, we're not just talking about Europe, and I've started to see the same things when I was in China. That sort of real interest in understanding the relationship between education and business, especially in the field of robotics where I was working in.
Yeah, I think you're so right, and that brings me to that point about trying to create an environment where people are curious to find out more. We had a conversation about at the HR panel, and that was about human resource professionals. Well, there's different levels of human resource professionals and different disciplines, but about the importance to understand technology, the future of technology, and how it can really impact the business, help the business grow, or help an organization achieve its objectives. And I think also in the education space, this needs to happen too. I know there are many forward-thinking teachers. I know there are brilliant people out there, but we can't have brilliant people. We need more. It needs to be everywhere. I'll quote Rohit Talwar, it needs to be intimate. We need to intimately be curious about how we can do things better and how we can serve our clients better, like our students or our employees. So I think that using these tools, but also using these tools to understand the more detailed tools that you can use in a business, like AI and robotics and so on.
I completely agree with you, and I think it's so important to encourage people to be open-minded about technology, and AI, robotics, and so on are there. When I was at school, there we were learning to multiply and divide with a slide rule, I remember the argument whether or not a calculator should be used in the classroom, and I thought that the attitude to that was really conservative with a small c. You need to be more ambitious. You need to be thinking, well, actually, this is a technology which they need to learn, so they might as well get on with it now. It doesn't mean to say you won't understand the principles of addition and multiplication and so on, but you do need to know what a calculator can do. I just would extend that point to say, well, look, whatever technology is coming along, we need to embrace it. Obviously, some will fail because some technologies do not succeed. But the other key point about technology is today that we think, well, we've got it all. We are busy doing this because we've got laptops and all of the rest. But tomorrow there'll be a completely new set of technologies, which will replace the ones we hold dear now. In other words, we've got to be prepared for perpetual change, and technology will always develop. There'll be always something new. And my guess is it'll carry on as it has done during the last century in a sort of exponential way. We will always be seeing new stuff. And I'm reminded of the alleged story about President McKinley, who speculated about saving money, and he was told the best way to do that was abolish the patents office, because the steam engine, the telegraph and repeater rifle had all been invented, and there wasn't much else to invent. Well, that was in the end of the 1800s. We know what happened next, and we should also therefore understand what might happen tomorrow. We need to get that firmly embedded in our education system.
Yes, and also at the board level in our companies, because I'd like people to consider, are they talking about how they can improve what they do with technology at their monthly board meetings? Is there someone there with that agenda, somebody with the responsibility to really delve into what competitions are doing or what the possibilities are? And I know a lot of big companies invest a lot of money and they do have people doing this, But a lot of the small companies, which is most of our business community, small and medium-sized organizations, often they don't have time. But I think at this time, it's really critical that they do have it at the board level agenda. So actually, they're aware that they should be asking these questions and looking for solutions to be more efficient and more effective.
You're quite right, Christina. And the small and medium-sized companies are often firefighting, dealing with things that are happening, which require emergency action. And the larger firms are more likely to think about the issues more holistically, more imaginatively. That gives Britain, at least, a problem because, of course, the number of small businesses we have here is massive as compared to other countries. And the number of larger firms, what we'd call a Mittelstand in Germany or something similar in America, is actually much more numerous elsewhere. And so we need to think about how we get our firms to grow so that they can actually do that kind of big thinking stuff, which you have mentioned, because that's, I think, one of the sort of helpful conditions where that big thinking can take place. But all firms need to, take a bit of time to think about technology, think about, how the economy is emerging, think about what the workforce is doing and how it might change and so on, because you need to do that.
I think this is where there's a good opportunity for the big companies to look after their supply chain and transfer knowledge with their supply chain and make sure they're at the standard they need to be.
Well, this takes us right back to the earlier point we were making about the importance of good relationships with supply chains, because, of course, a large company often does have a range of smaller ones producing, say, one or two things, but one or two things which are really important to the bigger project. Funny enough, Airbus, which I've already mentioned in the context of the Festival of Manufacturing and Engineering, is exactly a case in point. They were looking around my constituency for suppliers of paneling and so forth in aircraft. And Airbus were sensible enough to understand that they had to have a good relationship with their suppliers so that quality was always guaranteed, that product would arrive in time in plenty of numbers, and so on. And this is crucial, that the suppliers could adapt to changes in the aircraft itself. So when new models were being considered or updates were being considered, then change could be easily accommodated. So yes, you're absolutely right. And I think that is a very important point, and the big corporates do need to do it.
Thanks for that, Neil. Now, I know that you have a farming background, a little bit, so you could tell us a bit about that. And I know that many people involved in this conference also have a lot of involvement in agribusiness. For most of the countries I go to have more involvement in agribusiness than we do in the UK. And I know technology is heavy there. So I wanted to ask you, can you give us an idea of what the conversations are taking place in that world and where the investment is going, which equipment, or what the future looks like for agribusiness?
Well, that's a really good question. When I was a farmer 25 years ago, that's more or less when I stopped being a farmer to go properly into politics. Farming was doing quite well. It was relatively easy to make a profit, certainly in the United Kingdom, because just keep an eye on your marginal costs. But even then, products were becoming, let's say, more refined because the consumer was wanting them to be more refined. And technology was also playing a huge role in making it easier to produce more and more of whatever it is you were producing. So I'm thinking not just of fertilizers and the obvious things like that, but actually techniques and processes as well. Now, I have returned to the farm, so to speak, and my aunt Lizzie tells me I'm a hobby farmer, which is absolutely right. But I'm noticing the huge differences between now and 1998, 99. One of them, obviously, is the impact of farm machinery and the size of it and the technical capacities of it. And clearly, the big machinery manufacturers have really done quite well. And the interesting thing to note here is those that have developed new products and kept a pace with progress, John Deere and New Holland and so on, have really thrived because they've almost created new markets for their products by demonstrating the value of their products. And I think that's a very important point. The other interesting thing is, of course, agriculture, like any other sector, is regulated, but agriculture is regulated in really quite intense ways because nobody wants to be eating the wrong kind of food, and so on. So regulations are dominating the world of agriculture in a way that perhaps they don't dominate elsewhere. I think it's really interesting to see how the markets are responding to those sort of circumstances. And that, I think, is something which this sector does need to take into account because, of course, regulatory situations are different from one place to another. And then, of course, last but not least, we mustn't overlook the fact that some people are still hungry. And the system has to, deal with that particular question. And there are still places in the world, and I've seen them in Myanmar, where processes are as old as centuries ago, and therefore the scale of production is very limited, and the quality of the food produced is not good. So we have to tackle that as well. And I think it's a great opportunity for business to help in that field.
I think that's great that you've mentioned that, because although this is Global Digital Week and it's a focus on technology, but it's also a focus on technology and how it can also be a force for good. So, for example, some of those successful farmers and the advances that they'll have things to contribute to those small subsistence farmers in other countries. And again, it's that matching of needs and support, and how to be a good company, a good citizen, to transfer the knowledge and transfer how you run your business.
Yeah, well, corporate social responsibility is, or whatever you want to call it, and people are rightly adding the environment into that, is a good thing. And because we've all starting to understand just how important it is to look after our environment, we have to translate that into actions in the field in terms of agriculture, for instance. And the sensible person recognises that's the obvious thing to do, because what you don't want is the sort of repetition of the Dust Bowl problem in the United States, for example, or the toxification of land elsewhere because of other practices which were not appropriate. And so we do have to think about most policy areas much more holistically than before. But if agriculture does not respond to the need to also protect the environment, then of course it puts itself at risk.
Yeah, and I think Neil, it's not likely that we're going to have as much support from governments. There's a lot on the agenda at the moment. There's always support from governments, but there's nothing better than industries getting together to collaborate and innovate to see how they can do things better as an industry. So I think we all have to come together in different ways to contribute to the solution.
Yes, we do. You can't just rely on government, because if we're talking about a global economy, then you've got quite a lot of governments, each to think their own ways forward. And so you're not going to get everything as consistent as you might imagine, although there isn't increasing evidence that governments are working together to bring about good outcomes. But you're quite right. Business has a real opportunity and also responsibility to work together to deal with some of these issues. And as I've already pointed out about John Deere and New Holland and so on, manufacturing products which are making agricultural production easier and more efficient, but also more environmentally responsible across the whole globe. That's businesses looking for the opportunities in that way. And that's exactly what they should do, but we need to see more of it.
Yeah, that's great. Now, I want to move on to you recently taken on a new role. Is it Chair of Talent ED?
Yeah, talent. Yeah, talent ed.
Ed, is that how?
Yeah,
Can
it's
you
a
tell me
voluntary
about?
role. It's a voluntary role, but I was proud and pleased to do it. One of the difficulties that we've got in this country is that there are really far too many children who are not, let's say, getting the best out of the education system because of the impact of social deprivation, inequalities across the area, and so on. That is a complete disgrace, really. We need to make sure that everybody has a fair opportunity. That's good for society. It's also good for the economy. And therefore, what we're doing is saying, look, those who need extra support through tutoring, we're going to provide it. The government is actually supporting this through its national tutor program, but we are one of the key deliverers, and we're active in the Midlands, in London, and increasingly in the North. And I'm really pleased that we're helping so many young people, get the best out of themselves for the future that they richly deserve.
That's wonderful. It's great that there are so many other players rather than just the traditional educational system. There's a lot of focus. Lots of people are doing different things, different projects to support young people because we recognise it's a different world, and everybody needs to help, especially with what's just happened with COVID, because they have suffered a lot trying to make sense of what's going on. So, if they were disadvantaged before, it's going to be worse for a period of time.
You're completely right. And COVID certainly put the magnifying glass on that, and actually the multiplier as well. But we have to face up the fact that for too long we've had far too many children not being properly supported. And that is something we need to put right. I think it requires reform elsewhere in the education system. And I'm busy writing a book to explain what those reforms should be. And that will be published in May, so stand by for that. But as it is really important that we recognise that a child who is born in a nice part of London is obviously fortunate and lucky, but a child born in some part of the north or a coastal area, for example, where we know performance is not good, you've simply got to put that right. And we cannot have our people in this country having such a detrimental impact to the start of their life as we do have. Now, this applies to other countries as well, some less so than us, some more so. And so wherever you are, the important thing is to look to see if your education system is giving every young person the chance that they need.
Yeah, I think you're so right, because the educational system can only go so far, and I have seen this in other countries, and that's why it's so important, as you say, to engage the local stakeholders, people who know on the ground. They'll have the solutions. They just need a little bit of empowerment, direction, or a model to follow, something that's been successful in the past. So I'm pleased to see this taking place, but the more we can get coordinated and more of it, the better we'll be. And finally, I'd like to, this is my final question about how you keep up with technology. What do you do to stay ahead of the game?
Well, I'm actually quite interested in technology. You've pointed to my interest in agriculture. I like to see that. I'm actually interested in energy technology. I'm just naturally curious about how we can create things which do a better job than what we've already got. And so when I see that happening, I show interest. I'm not an engineer myself, but I have, taken things apart, put things together, and wondered how they could work in a more efficient manner and so forth. And the other thing that I think is really important is that you use technology in the way that's intended, but also perhaps also in an imaginative way too, because that's what I've learned about robotics and artificial intelligence. both are kind of talked about as if there's some sort of, holy grail, but actually both can be applied quite easily now to situations that we've got. Artificial intelligence, for example, in social care arenas, to helping people with disabilities. It's a classic example. And robotics, and not just in repetitive manufacturing, but in so many other possible ways of helping the environment, for example, by enhancing the marine life is an example. So that's what I think we can do with technology, and that's really what I try to do myself.
I think you're so. I do appreciate your insights here, Neil, and for sharing everything with our audience today. I've totally enjoyed it, and I think you probably agree that being curious in this space is really important for everybody. Getting used to using technology to communicate and moving over the fear, I think, is also important. There are lots of resources out there, lots of trainings, documentaries, tours, networking. But once you realize the area that you're trying, the industry you're in, or the area you want to go into, diving deeper and getting yourself in networks where people are talking about these things, and all of a sudden you become more knowledgeable about them. And I would recommend that would be the way to go for maybe some of the young students or young entrepreneurs watching this conference.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Christina. I think that's exactly right.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attention, and thank you to Neil Carmichael for giving us his insights in the education panel. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.